Good morning and welcome to today's Energyst webinar, Optimising Energy Assets, Management and Trading for Revenue and Savings. And thank you for joining us. Reducing energy consumption while maintaining production targets is a challenge many organisations face. But with advances in AI-powered forecasting, automated control and smart energy management, it's now possible to unlock flexibility, protect production quality and even create new revenue streams. We're delighted to be joined by Manik Lowe and Michael Kent from GridBeyond, who will guide us through how intelligent asset management, real-time optimization, and automated trading can enhance the performance of flexible assets like on-site generation, battery storage, and large energy loads. They'll also explore process optimization, market opportunities for I&C customers, and strategies to maximize returns while respecting operational requirements. We encourage you all to get involved and share your questions on the question panel on the right to make the most of this expert-led discussion. So please do that throughout the presentation, and then this will follow by a Q&A, which I'll then put to both our experts. So over to Manik then.
Thanks, Tim, and hello everyone. Great to be here today presenting to you. So my role is a global director of sales and sales operations. So I've been working within the commercial energy markets for the last sort of 12 years, and I've been working at GridBeyond for the last 7 years, and across all the solutions that we offer in all the grids that we operate across globally. So yeah, really excited to be here today to present to you the emerging opportunities, specifically within the UK market when it comes to energy optimization. Thank you. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Manik. My name is Michael Kent. I've been with GridBeyond for nearly 3 years now. My role is Head of EV Solutions. That actually takes a few more assets that we'll talk about today. So essentially, I'm looking with new emerging sectors in flexibility and wholesale markets in terms of the changes that are happening with the grids and new assets coming on board, and what we can do with those at GridBeyond. So it's a pleasure to be here today and share some insights with everybody. If we can skip to the next slide. Yeah, I'm just going to give a few overviews of terms of our business, the markets that we operate, and some of our assets and customers. So we were founded in 2010. We're headquartered in Dublin, Ireland. That's where our 24/7, 365 control, optimization and trading takes place. Our markets are also the UK. UK and Ireland are by far our biggest markets. They've been our legacy markets for a long time. We're also in Japan, Australia, and many of the states in the US now. If anyone asks the takeaway or the layman's terms of what we do as the core business, essentially we're using assets to help the grids balance at 50 hertz. So across the grids across the globe, there's frequency that needs to be kept to keep people's lights on, the grid operating to its optimum. So we essentially work with a number of customers, which we'll talk about today in these markets, using multiple assets and multiple technologies. Our load portfolio has grown quite considerably over the last few years. We're now managing nearly 2.5 gigawatts of total load across all of our markets and sectors. We're heavily engaged in the battery storage sector. That's in terms of optimization and trading of those assets. They can range from small residential assets all the way through to large front of the meter portfolio assets. We're not huge in terms of people, around about 165 employees at this time. We're just close to 1,000 customers and partners. Over the last few years, we've also brought new people onto our board, so the likes of ABB, Yokogawa, you can see at the bottom there, Constellation, and that's all in line with the emerging trends, emerging spaces in the flexibility and wholesale markets, and the growth that this business is currently undergoing. Next slide, please. So where we came from, on the left-hand side there, you'll see we were born out of what we would call demand-side response. So like I said at the start, using the flexible assets to keep the grids balanced. That comes with software solutions. So a lot of our batteries are traded via AI, what we call the trading cockpit internally. And then as the business has transitioned, we've moved into different types of solutions. So on the second image there, you can see on-site solar and battery. That can be simply optimizing customers' solar and battery through to their site load, where they might own and operate, those assets. But we have moved into asset funding. That's with an SPV via Triodos Bank, where we've got asset funding where we can deploy those assets to solve a multitude of problems, which I'll come on to later. We've also moved into the renewable energy purchasing space. So that's the PPAs, renewable trading, both from a demand customer and also a generation producer, and also moving into 24/7 carbon-free hourly energy matching, which Manik will talk about in a little bit of detail shortly. So the reason why we've moved into these different buckets is in line with a number of different things: the stress on the grid, the path to net zero, and more assets that are coming to the market on the national grids, such as EVs, heat pumps, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Just at a high level, we work across a multitude of sectors now. So you'll just see here in terms of some of the assets, some of the sectors that we're involved in, and some of the examples which fit into that. So you can see a range of sectors from cement all the way through to commercial and retail, and what types of flexible assets that sit on those sites. So essentially you can see the number of megawatts that we're managing, how many sites we're automating, and this is changing really rapidly at the moment in terms of this transition that I mentioned earlier. So things like EV chargers, heat pumps, smaller batteries at a residential level, these are all new assets which are emerging technologies which can be put into these markets that we're talking about today. So yeah, essentially you'll see a number of different sectors there that we're heavily involved with, and there's a lot more than that than just what's on this slide. I'm going to pass to Manik now, who's going to take over the next part of the webinar. So Manik, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're currently going through a major energy transition, as I'm sure everybody here is aware. You know, with the way that we are transitioning to renewable energy and decarbonizing our grids is creating various challenges and opportunities. We actually call it the 3 Ds: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization of energy. So this is leading to, like I said, both challenges, but also significant opportunities. So we find, you know, many companies these days are dealing with challenges around reducing energy costs, you know, as energy markets become more volatile and prices go up. You know, how do we become, you know, more flexible with the way we use power with regards to, for example, avoiding high energy peaks and hedging our energy costs? How do we enhance sustainability? You know, as a lot of large organizations, large and medium organizations now have pretty ambitious targets, for example, with science-based targeting initiatives, SBTi or RE100, with regards to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and accelerating the net zero strategy. You know, how do we help customers to achieve those targets by 2030 or 2050? Enabling resilience. You know, as the grid becomes more volatile, as we start depending more on renewable energy sources, there is an issue here around power quality problems increasing. And we'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about local DNO flexibility services, localized sort of regional services. So what is the cost of resilience to businesses? You know, how much backup do businesses need? Is there any way they can increase that and become more resilient in this environment? And then finally, grid constraints. You know, with the amount of, like I mentioned earlier, decentralization of power, you know, customers having their own on-site generation, customers interested in battery storage and other assets, expanding EV chargers, you know, expanding their, you know, data centers, expanding their electrical load. You know, how do we account for that when it comes to getting additional grid connections? Currently, there are very lengthy grid connection queues, very costly processes in place to get more grid connection. How can we help to mitigate some of those costs or that time scale? So there's various challenges currently that are being faced by organizations, but on the back of challenges are significant opportunities. So in the marketplace at the moment, you know, we've split our services either in terms of optimizing flexibility, which is looking at inherent flexibility, energy flexibility within assets, within industrial commercial processes, and seeing how can we safely monetize that within the demand side response markets, which we'll go into shortly. Or how can we become a bit more price responsive and flexible in terms of avoiding those high energy peaks, which is what we call you know, intelligent load shifting. So how can we essentially increase and unlock the value of energy flexibility, because that for us in terms of is what drives all of our solutions. You know, it's trying to make these services and solutions zero capex or no upfront cost for customers. And one of the main ways we do that is by first looking at what flexibility we can optimize to generate value, which we can then plug back into other services that we provide, like funded assets, you know, solar energy storage, helping customers with power purchasing agreements, analytics reporting, fleet electrification. So you know, we use our services around optimizing flexibility to generate value in the first instance, which we then can use to help accelerate customers on their path to net zero with the other services that we provide. So we try and offer a holistic kind of proposition where customers get the benefit of the three-way benefit of reducing energy costs, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, GHG emissions, and having additional resiliency, all while trying to keep it as much as we can on a zero capex basis for customers. So today we're going to talk about a few of the emerging opportunities in the UK, specifically around how we're optimizing flexibility in different ways to start that sort of first step of unlocking value for customers, which we can then build on. So we'll go into a little bit around that next. So if you want to just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here's a summary of the UK demand response services. Now, these are all either revenue generating or savings generating services for, you know, customers in the UK, for energy users or generators. So these can be categorized into response, reserve, capacity, energy, and local DNO. Okay, so response services are geared for mainly very fast assets like batteries. They also have a decent value attached to them, but because of the 1 second response time, they're typically reserved for very fast assets like batteries, potentially some maybe gas turbines. Then we've got the reserve services. Now the reserve services encompass store, balancing reserve, quick reserve. These services are applicable more for DSR assets. So here now we're starting to talk about you know, compressors, with sort of HVAC, energy store, even energy storage can go into it, EV chargers, other production assets, generators, so combined heat and power plants, or even using diesel generators if they are MCPD compliant, environmentally compliant. So this is quite a attractive service for most DSR assets because of the 20-minute response. So there's enough time to respond. And yeah, customers get paid to be unavailable. They get paid to be on standby effectively in the market. So the reserve services forms a key part of the stack for DSR assets. Then we've got the capacity market. I'll just go to that first. So typically we've found in the UK, when we talk about demand response, most customers will relay that to the capacity market, or even to triads, if some of us remember those from a few years back, and the way they used to be charged. So typically that's what customers refer to in terms of the sort of general level of insight around DSR. They know it as the capacity market. So the capacity market is an insurance policy to ensure we have enough supply to meet demand during the winters. And the prices for capacity have been on the increase over the last few years, showing its increasing attractiveness. So that's something that, of course, you know, I'm sure many have heard of in this webinar, but it's a very attractive service there, and one where there's never been an event. So customers get paid just to be available. As long as they can test for the market, then they can get revenue without having to really do much more. Then we have a very kind of emerging area here, which is local constraints and DNO flex. So all the services I've been talking about so far are on a national level, so they're procured by NESO, the grid operator. Whereas now what we're seeing over the last few years is the emergence of local flexibility programs that are tackling regional constraints on the grid. And these these programs are provided by your distribution network operator. And what we've seen is it's very dependent on postcode, the kind of area. But in the areas where there is a significant issue, the value is very attractive, often much higher than even the national grid level programs. And the good thing with these DNO programs is they can be stacked on top of the national grid programs. So it's not a case of one or the other, it's actually adding more value overall. I'll just go back to the energy market now. So in terms of the energy markets for the UK, again, this is something we're going to talk about today in more detail, because due to a new policy change called P415, is completely opened up the wholesale energy markets for industrial commercial customers, irrespective of their current energy supply arrangements. And this is going to allow customers to generate more value from their energy flexibility, irrespective of whether they're on a fixed supply energy supply contract or not. It's completely, separate to that. So it's adding on more value. And again, it can be stacked with the other services. So today we're going to be touching on these emerging markets like P415, like the local DNO flexibility services, to give you guys a real flavor of where the market is headed. So thank you. Next slide. Okay, so starting off with P415 then, what is P415? Next slide, please. So P415 is a modification to the balancing settlement code that allows what they call VLPs, or virtual lead parties, like GridBeyond, to participate with customers' flexible loads directly into the wholesale market without the need to go through the energy supplier. So in the past, for customers that are on fixed contracts, there was really no benefit in trying to be flexible with the way customers use power against the energy peaks. But now with this mechanism brought in, is to encourage more flexibility into the market from demand side customers. So it's a completely new income stream that can be generated by participating existing assets or even new assets like heat pumps, generators, batteries, any demand side load straight into this market. And we can do this either by using our hardware in conjunction with our softwares to actually be able to provide that dispatch, or it can be done manually, or it can even be done by manually mean customers can do it themselves, or we can even integrate with the customer's centralized BMS system through an API control to be able to do this. So there's actually potentially no hardware needed these days to do this if we go down that route. So this is a revenue generating service. So I'll go into it a little bit more on the next slide, but in addition to making a saving on the commodity cost by just turning down your power, you also get an actual revenue stream from the grid, which is stacking on top effectively. Like I mentioned earlier, there's no supplier change or contract modification needed here. So we can help customers to access this market regardless of their current energy contract structure. So even if they're on a fixed contract, they can get that supply security that customers want, but at the same time, they can get rewarded for being more flexible. So think of it as a way of filling in the gap that's been created by, triads. The way triads have changed, there's not really that much of an opportunity to load shift for triads anymore. But this is something that's come in to sort of replace that and put in more value for customers to fill the gap. And finally, P415 is stackable with other flexibility markets. So you can create an incremental revenue stream on top of the other services. So for example, a demand side resource, an asset could do capacity market, reserve service, and do P415 to really get the value of every aspect of that stack, and actually do local DNO flex if it falls into a sort of local constraint region. So everything here is around trying to maximize the value for customers by stacking services, but ensuring that we're minimizing any sort of on-site disruptions. So this is I'm going to just go into a little bit more around how how P415 works. Want to go to the next slide? So what does a trade look like? So if you want to just click the next one there, please. So firstly, we establish a baseline volume for the expected usage. Okay, so this is basically what you're already going to be consuming on the asset. And if you click next, then we look at how we can reduce your demand during those peaks, which ends up being the actual energy consumed. Next. The difference between the two is called the deviation volume. And this is what we trade into either the day ahead market or the intraday market across the best price period across 30-minute blocks, half-hour blocks. So it's that difference is what we're actually monetizing in the market. Next, please. And then we share the earnings with the customer. So that's just a very kind of simple trade to show you how this would work. Next, please. And then here's a little bit around the value. So here we're looking at 10 megawatts of flexibility. So we're seeing here that the revenues depend on the flexible capacity that the site can turn down, their appetite for dispatch, meaning how many hours per year could you do this for, and then which markets we put them into, whether it's day ahead or an intraday. So here looking at it, we've got a range. So for example, if a customer was doing 12 hours per year of dispatch, then the value could be around 71K per 10 megawatts. And if they were doing, let's say, 260 hours on the other end per year, the value could be around 380K over those 10 megawatts. So the flexibility here can be monetized by either turning down the load or shifting the load from low prices to high prices. And again, this is all on top of the commodity savings. So just, the savings you get from turning down the commodity and non-commodity savings, you would also get a revenue on top to the amounts that are mentioned in the table there. Next, please. And then this is a very important piece here. So when it comes to P415, unlike other services, there is no payment for availability. The asset actually has to turn down to generate value. Now, we use what we call our digital twin to be able to unlock that for sites. And what that is, just in the interest of time, I'll just kind of very quickly touch on it. By using our AI-based price forecasting of these markets, day ahead and intraday markets, and by combining that with what we call our digital twin, which is essentially a simulation environment where we can model a customer's site in terms of their production parameters, their production schedules, any other site information that would be applicable to ensure that we work within customers' operational parameters. And then by combining the two things together, we can find where it's safe and profitable to be able to provide that flexibility in P415 without affecting a customer's production process or their production output. And this is quite a key thing because this is actually what unlocks the flexibility for P415. Because P415, is the more hours you can do, the more hours you can turn down in the year, the more revenue you make. So this helps to enable that in a safe way to minimize site disruption, but maximize the revenue that can be obtained from P415. And there's a whole piece we could go into around the digital twin. It's very sector specific. So we've designed digital twins for each market sector, whether different industrial sectors, more public sector orientated, etc. So again, in the interest of time, I'll keep moving here. Next, please. And then finally, this is just giving you an example here of a real world customer. So we're currently deploying this with a cement mill in the UK. Well, multiple cement mills with a cement company in the UK. We've been working with this company since 2018, so for some time now, and we currently manage 25 megawatts of flexibility across various DSR markets and the energy market as well. And we've actually used our digital twin here to model the flexibility within markets like P415. And what we found was before, the customer was only perhaps turning down 2 or 3 times per year when the price was right. However, using this digital twin and AI forecasting, we managed to increase that to nearly daily curtailment, so nearly 1 hour a day of 5 megawatt curtailment. And that would lead to offsetting the earnings, but these earnings would offset the energy cost by 10%, which is quite significant. So again, like I said, we work with multiple sectors, but this is just giving you an example of one of the customers that we've done this for in the UK. So I think that's potentially my last slide. Next, please. I think I might be passing it on to Mike now. Yeah, so I'm going to pass it on to Mike now to run through the local DNO Flex services. Thank you.
Thanks, Manik. You can take a little break there in the water. So I'm going to cover the local DNO flexibility markets with yourselves and just talk about what they are, how they work, and some examples of what's going on in these markets linked to grid constraints, essentially. So what are they? And Manik mentioned at the start, these are locally run markets that are either procured by the DNO or via a platform called Picklow Flex. And essentially, it's a bidding platform where you can enter assets in, ranging from home assets all the way through to large C&I assets to make those available either for availability and/or utilization. So each DNO has a different methodology or a different area in terms of what they require. It can be availability and utilization, or utilization only, so reduction and so on and so forth. So they can be existing assets that are already in markets. So what we look at within our portfolio is all our existing assets when we're onboarding, and if there's an opportunity to fit those in naturally. And what's starting to emerge now is some of the constraints which are coming, which means there's more of a play for things like batteries, which I'll come on to shortly. They're measured really specifically in terms of a constraint management zone, a CMZ. I'll show you an example shortly where the zone, the constraint zone, is against a local substation. So where that local substation has constraints, there's different connections, businesses, etc., tapped into it. That's where the local DNO will be opening up more flexibility. So why are they there? Why are they important? It's emerging in terms of the country, various areas of the country, that they're becoming heavily constrained, which means that local intervention needs to take place. Some of these are very granular times of day, times of year. So the bids are maybe between hours X and Y on a Monday to Friday, and in winter only, for example. So it's really granular intervention to ensure that that local grid is remaining stable. What's also happening, and we're getting more and more customers sort of raising this, is it is causing problems for site operations, particularly those in high production environments. So things like voltage dips, you know, that's a key one. So it's knocking equipment out in some cases. You know, production is being ceased because of these constraints. And also on the flip side to that, with the path to net zero, a customer might be looking at fleet electrification. It might be that the cost of the upgrade is quite high, or they might have to wait a few years for that upgrade to take place. So these markets go hand in hand with what's going on in the grid, essentially, in terms of some of the problems that are emerging. What the good news is, or some of the trade-off or the solutions, is you can receive an additional revenue stream on top of the national services that Manik mentioned before. So it can be stacked with other services whilst maybe solving some problems at the same time. So that's what it is as a whole. I'm just going to skip to the next slide to show you an example. Next slide, please. Here we go. So you'll see that this is an example CMZ. This is rugby. I picked this one out because this is quite interesting. You'll see on the left-hand side the map. You'll see the shaded black area. That's where the constrained area is, or the CMZ is. So anything that sits inside that's connected to that substation or substations is likely to be constrained. And the interesting part with this is you'll see a table on the right-hand side. You'll see what you're seeing here is the procurement that's expected locally by year and by megawatts. So you'll see there 2025, nothing. 2026, a tiny bit. But then if you go into 2027 and onwards, you'll see that based on what's going on in that local grid, and more assets maybe coming on board, more things connected to the local grid, the DNO are expecting more local flexibility to be required in that area. So you'll see from 2027, it starts at a megawatt, and by 2034, it's at 11 megawatts. So what this is meaning, essentially, if a customer has got is going through electrification, like I said, increase on grid upgrades might be a problem. Definitely some voltage problems could be occurring there at certain sites. It all goes hand in hand with what we're seeing in these flexibility markets there. Then you'll see on the right-hand side, the two last columns on the right, you'll see an availability and a utilization price. You can see there that this DNO is procuring availability and utilization. And you can see on the right-hand side, the utilization is coming in at £9,000 per megawatt hour. The DNO haven't published the prices for 2030 onwards, but as you can see, with the increase in megawatts required, that's likely to be continued in terms of the requirements are going to be needed moving forward. So that's a picture of what's emerging. And like I said at the start, more and more customers are starting to feel those problems and see those problems. So that's just an example there, and there's a whole array of different CMZ zones across the country. If we just skip to the next slide, I'll come on to some of the solutions that customers are looking at, is batteries. So like I said, some customers are seeing these problems. A lot in 0.5 there on the slide in terms of voltage support. I've got a site down south at the moment who's got major problems. It's a 1 megawatt site, and the battery is going in as a UPS backup. So the customer is getting their voltage problems reduced and solved, but on the flip side, they're actually able to earn more money against the asset at the same time. So voltage is a key area, I think, moving forward in terms of, okay, we're a production site or we're having dips. How can we solve this, and how can we get the payback on it without, without breaking the bank? Other areas is probably things like connection management. So that can be EVs, heat pumps, things like that. So a battery could be that top up of MIC, or maximum import, that the customer needs to allow more charging. So we're seeing more and more of this come into the market. And on the flip side, it is problematic, but on the plus side, there are more opportunities to look at alternative revenue streams through these DNO services. If we skip to the next slide. Just before we close off and we go to the floor for Q&A, I'll come on to other elements that we're seeing in the flexibility markets with commercial multi-site. Previously in these markets, in the demand side response markets, you might need to install metering and things like that. And that would, reduce the ability for a customer with multiple sites to enter into these markets because there's a cost of hardware and so on and so forth. If we just skip to the next slide, I'll show you an example of one of our customers who's recently been onboarded. Just before we go on to that, we've talked a little bit about the future of flexible demand. This is where we see it sitting. So high electrification targets in the UK, bus, truck, people's homes, from EV fleet to domestic EV charging. That gives an ability for the flexible markets. Things like storage we've talked about, things like electric heating. What we're starting to see is a shift of the old, industrial load, if you like. So traditional industries, and where the flexibility is moving to is these types of assets here. And what we find with a lot of customers that are going for these transitions of, large fleet operators, commercial customers, they're not necessarily aware of these markets they can tap into. So there's a real shift going on at the moment, and will continue to go on in line with new assets that are going to be coming on board, which impact these grids, which can then enter these markets. So as part of our product development over the last few years, we've developed an API product which can essentially tap into these assets on an aggregated level, which negates the needs for hardware at each individual site or asset. If we just skip to the next slide, I'll explain and give you a use case of one of our customers. Before I do that, this is how it works on a integration basis. So on the bottom, you've got the assets. So they can be things like heat pumps, EV chargers, smaller batteries, anything where a customer's got a range of those across their portfolio, across different locations in the UK. Then a lot of them have central control. So that could be a charger management system, a building management system, for example, whatever it is that's the heartbeat of those which can control and talk to them. Then what we've done is we've developed this API which talks to that central control, gives us the information we need to bid into the market, and then backwards we send the dispatch through to that central control to take action on those assets downstream. So this is a way which, as I said, multi-site customers, multi-site retailers, whatever it is, may have smaller assets that have thought about demand side response before and thought, can't get into the market because I need metering. It's going to cost X amount per meter per site. This is a way where the market is opening up to be able to access these markets and help keep the grid balanced while earning a revenue stream. So I will come on to the use case now on the next slide. And this is a customer that we've just onboarding at the moment. This is a multi-site retailer. They've got 550, well, they've got 915 stores in the UK. There's 550 with heat pumps. They've gone for a massive heat pump rollout recently. And what you can see on here is the megawatts that we're able to enter into the market. and the revenue forecast for that customer over the next 4 years. On the right-hand side, the net of installation is 0, and that's using the API. So essentially what these are is a load of small heat pumps are at each location, all bundled together in that one portfolio there. So you can see on 550 stores, there's 8.6 megawatts available for the market. Once they've gone through their heat pump program across all of their stores, it rises to an approx load of 14.4 megawatt. So that customer's going to make that available for the capacity market initially. Obviously with the API, that can access other services, but this is a gentle introduction for the customer into the flexibility space. They've never done this before. And this is where a lot of our customers who have got new technologies or never done these markets before start. And then it can grow into other markets such as reserves, wholesale markets that Manik mentioned before, and so on and so forth. And essentially the way that we control it is on what I showed on the last slide earlier. So we talk to their BMS provider. We gather all the information that we require to be able to bid into the market, and we're sending signals back for things like testing, events, and so on and so forth. So the customer doesn't actually have to manually do anything in this scenario in terms of intervention at each of the 550 stores. As you can imagine, if it was manual, that wouldn't work very well. So this is a way that customers can think about, okay, I'm building out my net zero. At the same time, what opportunities sit out there in this flexibility and wholesale market spectrum? So yeah, just thought we'd mention on the emerging markets there. So that's the end of the slides. I think it's back to Tim now, who's going to drive the next part.
Yes, thank you both. That was really, really great. And do keep the questions coming in. I'll kick off immediately with probably more for Manik, I think, was about the P415, because it says, can you share more on how a customer's baseline usage is calculated? Does this change as the customer participates on the market and the load is shifted? Would this mean the value opportunity would decrease over time if the deviation volume reduces? So firstly, yeah, how do you calculate it? A little bit more on that.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, look, the baseline can be calculated. I think for P415, it can be done almost on a daily basis. It depends. If we're bidding day ahead, for example, we could do it on a daily basis, and yeah, then we would record the deviation volume from that point. And what was the second part of the question?
Well, does this change as the customer participates on the market and the load is shifted?
Yeah, so there's two types of turn downs. There's a load down or a load shift. So a load shift would be, a load down would be simply turning down when the price exceeds the particular trigger price where it makes sense, and that would just be turning down the load. Load shifting is something which is a bit more sophisticated. Is where we're shifting the load to make up the production. For example, if it's the manufacturing site, we're shifting the load to a low price period to make up that production, and then we're basically turning the asset down during the high peak prices. So they're different things. There's some sectors that can do a straight just load turn down if the price is right. There's other sectors where we can use more intelligent load shifting. For example, where we've got production targets or we've got certain buffers like storage buffers we can use and whatnot. So yeah, it all depends on the site to site.
And obviously, as it reduces, if the deviation reduces, I assume that just does reduce the revenue.
Yeah, it's all dependent on the deviation volume at that given time. So yeah, but it would be during that.
There's another question in the baseline here, which is considering the baseline of the asset to be flexed, how do you know it was operating at that baseline? And by turning down, how much of it is contributed? Consider a HVAC where if it was idle at the time and therefore BMS trigger to turn it off wouldn't give the value. Also, what does it apply to EV charging?
Yeah, so the way it would work is we would for example, if it's day ahead, we would bid into it, in blocks day ahead. So the market is broken across 30-minute settlement periods. So we would be looking at, for example, the next day at the highest 30-minute blocks, could the asset turn down? And of course,
but what if it was already off for some other reason? I don't know. It was a hotter day than you expected, and the aircon's off.
Yeah, well, we would need to take that into account. So the asset would ideally need to be on during that time the next day.
Yeah,
in order to get that deviation volume. Otherwise, it wouldn't register any deviation volume. If it was already off, there just wouldn't be any payment for it.
yeah. So it does take that into account immediately. Yeah. There's sort of a combined two questions, but there's one that says how much revenue or savings could we realistically expect? But also you provided a 10 megawatt example. What is the de minimis load you would consider? So,
Do you want me to take that, Manik?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Revenue and savings would depend on the asset in question, the speed of asset response, and the ability in terms of the how long it could be flexible for. Per megawatt, if we take capacity market revenues, that the T1 auction cleared at, this is for this delivery year, that cleared at £20,000 per megawatt in that market. So it is essentially the way that we look at this is, what's the customer's half-hourly data across their site or sites? What are the assets that are potentially flexible, and how long could they remain flexible for? So we do all of that as the initial scoping in terms of, okay, what flexibility do we think we can get from it? And some customers, might say, right, you could do market X, Y, and Z. And some customers say, oh, okay, well, I might just want to start with market 1 or market X or whatever it is. So that's how things are scoped out, Tim. What was the second question on that?
Minimum requirements. Example sounded great, but is there de minimis? Is there a minimum you can get these benefits?
So it depends. So if we're talking, I'll take CNI now. Generally, to make it sort of viable and interesting, our smallest asset on a CNI basis, I think it's, don't quote me on this, I think it's about 196 kilowatts. I think that's very specific.
Fairly small, yeah.
But then on a multi-site sort of aggregated smaller asset point of view, if we're working with a customer with multiple sites and smaller assets and there's a way to control them, the smallest asset we've got in the market right now is 7 kilowatts. And I know that because that's an EV charger. That's with a relationship with a CMS provider.
And can people aggregate if they're not the same company? Are there aggregation services to bundle different assets together to make them a decent, viable amount?
So yeah.
Effectively, there is. So we provide flexibility in baskets. So for some services, it can be national, it doesn't matter where you are in the country. For other services, it's down to the grid supply point level, the GSP level. You can only group it within a certain region.
Yeah.
But a big part of it is whether we need to install hardware or not. That's the deciding factor in terms of how small we can go. If we have to install hardware, then we're looking at a few hundred kilowatts. If we can API into the assets and through a centralized system, and we don't need to put any hardware, then we can go much, much smaller, like down to the residential level, like tens of kilowatts.
There's a slightly different question for one, and one which your company should be a good place to answer. What are the opportunities in Ireland?
So in Ireland, there's a couple of opportunities. So the main flexibility services in Ireland are called DS3, and then there's capacity. So in Ireland, though, there's a couple of emerging opportunities which we're helping customers with. One is around helping customers to secure more environmentally friendly backup generation. So HVO diesel generation, and those we can put into the market as well. So it gives customers a three-way benefit. It gives them additional resilience. It helps to help them. It helps them on their sort of emissions profile because we're switching from diesel gen to HVO gens. And then these HVO generators we can actually put into the capacity market and DS3 market to make this a fully funded zero capex offering for customers. So that's an emerging solution. In Ireland also, the energy market is expected to open up in time for industrial commercial customers. And actually, we also have a local DNO service that started in Ireland to reward localized flexibility. So it is following suit on the UK in terms of where things are going.
Mm-hmm.
Just on Ireland, sorry, Tim, just on Ireland, the minimum thresholds in terms of asset size are a bit easier to enter as well. However, on a multi-site, smaller asset level, that's still work in progress from the grid's perspective. So some of the stuff we've talked about for the UK today, particularly on the smaller asset level, is still being developed over there. But from an asset size point of view, it's much easier to enter the market over there from that point of view. It's just bundling together things and assets in that way is still being developed by the bodies at the moment.
Are you guys trading BTM assets through P415 now?
Yeah, like the example I showed you guys earlier with the cement company.
It's going and happening, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, this ties in. I've got two questions because I had one registration into this, but it's about power quality issues. Is power quality within the grid from IBR and LCTs growing enough that businesses need a power resilience strategy?
Well, what we're seeing is that voltage on the local level is definitely becoming worse, because that's a big part of the reason why the DNOs are procuring for these long-term tenders, specifically around constrained substations. So because of these issues, we're seeing that's why they want to plug in assets that can manage that, like batteries, like flexible load. So yeah, we are seeing in those localized pockets is getting worse. The voltage problems.
The other question said a lot of power quality businesses are caused by distributed generation. Can AI correct power quality issues?
Well, I'm sure it's being worked on somewhere, but it's not something that we particularly looked at on the sort of grid level. Of course, what we're trying to do this on a sort of customer site level, and trying to use AI where possible. But really, when it comes to power quality issues, the main solution that we're recommending is energy storage to help manage those voltage disturbances, which is something that we're offering on a zero capex basis, using flexibility as a driver to get those assets.
This one says, I've heard that the metering requirements for some markets are quite strict. Could you share more about it, if I will be able to access stricter markets with distributed resources?
I'll take that one. Because this has been something I've worked on heavily over the last sort of year and a half or so. In essence, the short answer is yes, there are different metering requirements per service, per market, across the UK space. That's from a settlement and performance data point of view. So what if we take a C&I site first, so something where it's an on-site asset, like a battery, like a fridge or freezers or cold stores, whatever, so that's fairly bread and butter. That would require a frequency meter to be installed to control, monitor, record that asset for the various markets that we're trying to get it into. Where sometimes we can hit some blockers is with the API solution, because installing a frequency meter at every single asset level just wouldn't be feasible from a commercial point of view. So with our API, we've been able to access multiple markets now, mainly the reserve markets, capacity, wholesale, but that requires, in a lot of cases, the partner to have the right level of frequency or telemetry, as we call it, from their platform into us. So hence the reason why we developed this very specific API, which is, I'm not a software person, but I know it's via MQTT. And that basically ensures that we can get that information from that BMS, CMS, whatever it is, into us to be able to access as many markets as possible. So in essence, if we're talking C&I, there's generally, our metering is installed, as a given in most circumstances. If we're on the API, then it does require some scoping with those given partners to make it happen, but it's not impossible. We've done it on a multiple examples now to access markets and smaller assets in on behalf of customers.
This is interesting. When you load shift to customers' demand, how is the customer's supplier made aware of the changes in the demand pattern?
Yeah, so this is an automatic mechanism, so whereby the customer deviates the volume, right? Turns down the volume. They're compensated from the grid, and the grid. There is also a mechanism by which the grid makes the supplier whole. during that time. So the grid, the suppliers won't lose out here because the grid will make them whole.
And they
So
won't be a victim to not fulfilling capacity demands from their supply contract or something like that.
no, it's completely irrespective of that, like separate to that.
We're under pressure, as this one says, to hit net zero targets. How does this help us reduce carbon and meet ESG goals?
Yeah, so we go on, go on, Mike.
Well, you can maybe add to the end. So under pressure to reduce carbon targets and net zero goals, there's a couple of things where I guess we do support without or do support already. And that's with, as we've talked, with things like maybe on-site renewables, battery storage to take away from the peaks and so on and so forth. What we do with our, a lot of our, if you like, more RE100 customers, SBTI customers, we provide them with reporting and dashboards in terms of the carbon reduction, so via our EMS platforms and so on and so forth, so they can actually see where they're going. Linked to that, and I'm not ashamed to say this, we do earn revenue off these assets too, because when you're faced with a boardroom or multiple parties in terms of, okay, we need to reduce our emissions by X and Y, you know, where we come in is, yeah, we can show that, we can report that if you're going to install X asset, Y asset, and so on and so forth, or you're going to do this, but actually you can earn some revenue on the back of it as well. So the business case over time becomes a different way of looking at things. So with our customers, particularly in fleet, that, you know, they've got carbon reduction targets, which is reducing their emissions with their replacement of vehicles from ICE to EV. But linked to that, they've also got, you know, different pillars and different revenue lines in terms of where their revenues from these markets are going to go. So, i.e., their total cost of ownership, if you like. So, from our side, we come in with, you know, it depends what the customer wants, but we've got different platforms that can actually show, okay, if you did X, if you installed X amount of solar, or you bought a PPA off here, what would it mean to your emissions? And that can be reported on and fed back in for things like board reporting. Manik, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to that on that side.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is, like I was saying earlier, like flexibility sits at the core of it. So, you know, whether even demand response has a net zero value, because, you know, if you're supporting the grid during high times, you know, when there's highly intensive carbon generation on the grid, then there is actually a benefit by enabling renewable generation to come in by customers being more responsive.
And can that be measured, that you stopped a coal-fired power station being turned on for peaking assets?
Absolutely. So we work with an independent creditor where we've actually quantified that. So we can implement that. Plus we can use it to implement solar, energy storage, these HVO generators I was telling you about. So that helps on the local level. And then on the market level, we can help with you know, commercial power purchasing agreements, CPPAs, with generators, and also help with REGO trading in renewable energy credits and trading those. So there's various things we can do to help customers at each step of the way of the net zero journey, but and also help to fund that through flexibility.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, obviously a worry for a lot of people, this, but do you include cybersecurity audit as part of your work to ensure no digital vulnerability?
Go on, Mike, you want to take that, or should I?
Short answer, yes. I don't know, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but all of the cybersecurity, the essentials, etc., is managed by our IT. And you know, if we're tendering for work, let's say, with a customer, yeah, all of the housing in terms of data and all the rest of it is protected, essentially. So, yeah, we do have customers ask for all of this credentials before
Sure.
contracting with them, particularly the larger companies, if you like.
This is probably for you again, Michael. It's about the local. Did you say that home batteries are considered for local DNO flex services, and if so, how can one apply to be part of this?
Yeah, they can be. Yeah. So in the local DNO flex markets, there's assets on a small scale. For those to be considered, it depends on who owns the asset, i.e., is it with you know, the homeowner, if you like. In our world, we partner with a lot of if you like, suppliers in terms of, okay, they've installed the battery and they want to open up flexibility.
Right.
So in a lot of our partnerships on a residential basis, we're sort of the market access, if you like, but then we're working maybe with a company who's maybe controlling a battery or a charger, who then offers that product out to their B2C customer. So we couldn't onboard one battery at a person's house because of that, but there's different ways of accessing the market. So if the person that's asked that wants to reach out, more than happy to sort of give some insights in terms of how they could look at that and consider their asset going into the market and what they could do with it, essentially, probably via a partner in the first instance that we might work with.
Fairly quick one here. Do you manufacture your own battery systems, or do you work with third-party BES?
Third parties.
Yeah.
We just a quick one on that. All our hardware in terms of metering, that's ours, and all our software back end. We've got loads of dashboards these days in terms of what customers see. That's all our own IP. But yeah, if we're funding batteries, we'll buy them from a supplier essentially.
I'm not aware of this, so hopefully you'll get it. Has the mutualization issue been resolved?
This is regards to, this sounds like it's in regards to People15.
Yes, I imagine. Yes, actually, he did ask a question on that. Sorry, earlier. Yeah.
It's a very good question.
Yes, it is P415. It's confirmed. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure. That's one we'd have to check with our regulatory expert and to see where that is. I believe it's still in motion. I don't know if there's been any definitive conclusions there, but I wouldn't know. I need to check. But we can definitely get back to that person by checking with our regs team.
Obviously, you're saying within local and so on that you've got it can be stacked with various other schemes, with national and so on. Is there a dispatch priority that these have? And obviously, in the unlikely event they call at the same time.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the thing is, for the local DNO Flex, it's very granular hours of dispatch or availability. So essentially, it can be for like an hour every day over a month. So when you actually get into the granular detail of it, it's not as if you'd have a conflict in a lot of cases in terms of the left hand not shaking the right and so on and so forth. So
but
essentially,
wants it in that same hour on a sudden event.
We would likely prioritize the grid level service in that respect, because the DNO Flex services currently have no penalties. So if you don't show up today, you're not penalized. Whereas with some of the grid services, you potentially could be. So we'll follow grid service priority, I think.
When assets are grouped together, how would the power meter requirement be satisfied by the API? Is it as simple as summing them up, or is it something more complex?
Yeah, it's essentially a high level. We're pulling all of the meter data in from the site or the asset or both, and it's combining that overall load that is made available for the market. So essentially, there's data flows that come in via the API. That's given us the consumption data and so on and so forth, bundled together in a portfolio. Sounds easy. It's probably not for the software guys and the regs guys, but essentially, yeah, it's gathering metering and asset data through the API to be able to bid into the market and essentially be able to settle in those given markets.
I'll just do fine. One quick question. Sorry to interrupt, because I see the time's running, and if there are questions that are unanswered, I'll pass them over to Manik and Michael. Perhaps they can follow up after the event. But are you flex assured was the last one? I assume that's they're not called the ADE anymore, but their scheme.
I'm not sure. Me personally, we'll have to come back on that one. I'm not sure what.
No, okay, well that's fine, and there are a number that
yeah.
I didn't get around to. So no, thank you for all your questions, and yeah, it is ADE's flex assured that we're talking about, but no, I'll pass them over to you because I think we've got to wrap up now. And thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Michael and Manik, for your insight today. Thanks a lot. And there's slides and Materials will be made available to everyone who attended after the event on the energyst.com. Many
Thank you very
thanks.
much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.